What if I told you that what you knew about Brown v. Board of Education wasn't the whole story? You probably know that in 1954, the Supreme Court ruled in Brown v. Board that all segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. But there's an important backstory. There were earlier steps being taken to integrate schools. One of the bigger steps happened because of Ada, Lois, Sipuel, Fisher. A frontier can be defined as a line or border separating two things, an extreme limit. For people like Ada Fisher, segregation and racism were a frontier. Most people cannot cross these boundaries because of fear and the danger sure to come. Ada Fisher wanted to get into the University of Oklahoma, but was denied because she was African American. Yet she had the courage to challenge OU's decision in court. That is what makes her a special pioneer. Ada, Lois, Sipuel, Fisher, and her courage before, throughout, and after her lawsuit got her into OU law, crossed the frontiers of racism and segregation, and unlocked the doors to school segregation. Her case brought national attention to the NAACP's cause at a critical stage, making it possible for the NAACP to keep fighting and eventually win Brown v. Board. Ada Lois grew up in a period where racism fueled unfair laws against Black Americans. Although slavery was abolished in 1865 by the 13th Amendment, many white Southerners thought of African Americans as inferior and looked for ways to continue to oppress Blacks, and even lynched Black Americans unfairly for doing things such as becoming too successful. While lawmakers also found ways to persecute African Americans and stamped them with a badge of inferiority by creating Jim Crow laws, state and local laws enforcing racial segregation. These laws led to separate hotels, segregated seats and buses, divided water fountains, and more. Early cases to challenge segregation led to decisions like Plessy v. Ferguson, which in 1896 established the precedent that as long as white and Black facilities were equal, it was okay to segregate. But separate but equal was a fantasy. Black schools, equipment, and facilities were never equal, and white schools were always better. In addition, it was a difficult social battle. Many parents despised having their white children mixing with Black students, and because of this supported segregation.
And I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
For people who grew up with Jim Crow laws, the separate but equal idea created a frontier of racism and segregation that begged to be crossed, especially when it came to school segregation. Learning is the foundation to everything, and that is why the NAACP chose to target the desegregation of schools before buses, hotels, and everything else. Knowledge is power, and the African American community was hungry to learn. School segregation was like a locked door that denied the necessity of equal education and opportunities in life, which motivated pioneers like Ada Lois to cross these frontiers. The NAACP knew this door had to be burst open, and Ada had the confidence and poise to lead the way. During the summer and fall of 1945, the National NAACP reached out to all its chapters to enlist their participation in a desegregation plan, beginning with schools. For this to happen, the NAACP needed qualified plaintiffs with an unyielding belief in the principles that all men are created equal no matter what color of their skin, and that everybody deserves equal education. The plaintiffs would need to be academically qualified, articulate, and have the poise and confidence to fight through the long battle. They'll need to be able to delay their career and life during the lawsuit, and they'll have to be ready to take the risk of not getting a job, being run out of town, or even being killed. With Thurgood Marshall, who would eventually become the lead counsel in Brown v. Board, pushing them forward, the Oklahoma chapter was ready to find a plaintiff to challenge Oklahoma's segregation laws. The NAACP was looking for men, and in particular, war veterans. W.H.A. Bullock, Chickasaw NAACP director, wanted to recruit Lemuel Sipuel, Ada's brother. Lemuel wanted to get his life back on track after returning from World War II and declined. Ada knew what NAACP was looking for and heard her brother refuse. Ada had been valedictorian in high school and had gone to Langston University, where she had graduated with honors in English earlier that year. Importantly, Ada was already a member of the NAACP. Ada had always wanted to be a lawyer and understood the risks and challenges she would face. So when her brother declined, she stepped forward. The NAACP knew how special Ada was and agreed. 10 days later, Ada traveled to Oklahoma City and met with Roscoe Dungy, Oklahoma NAACP president. Dungy drilled Ada with questions to see how she would react under certain circumstances and reviewed her transcripts. Dungy thought Ada was perfect for the case. On January 14th, 1946, Ada Lois, Roscoe Dungy, and W.A.J. Bullock marched up to the admissions office and applied to OU. In the letter of rejection, George Lynn Cross, president of OU, said Ada was academically qualified in all aspects, but because of the color of her skin, she could not attend the university. The NAACP expected this, but now they had a letter saying she had been denied because of her race. Having what they needed, the NAACP prepared for the lawsuit. Marshall instructed Amos D. Hall, assistant attorney on the case to write a letter to the Oklahoma Board of Regents to inform them that Ada wanted to go to law school, so the state could not use the defense that the plaintiffs had not given the state an opportunity to correct the denial of admission. The state did not have an in-state law school for blacks, and at the time was offering to pay for out-of-state admissions for law school. But Ada didn't want an out-of-state law school for black students. She wanted to go to OU, and according to Guernsey, Canada, another important case almost 10 years earlier, the state had to provide a school for her in Oklahoma. Because she wanted integration, not segregation, Hall did not send the letter. On April 6, 1946, Ada drove with Hall and Dungy to file the petition for mandamus seeking admission into OU. The NAACP's argument was that separate but equal was the law of the land, and because they had no black law school, then the state must admit her. The defendant's argument was that they didn't know Ada wanted to go to law school, so they didn't have a chance to right or wrong and make a new law school for African Americans. They argued this even though they knew they could not afford a new school. After a short trial, the judge made his ruling against the plaintiffs. The NAACP was not defeated yet and prepared an appeal to the state court. The state also ruled for the defendants. This allowed the NAACP to appeal the case to the nation's highest court, the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C. NAACP attorneys responded to the questions the Supreme Court justices gave for them. The questions for the defendants were pointed and seemed like they were in favor of Ada's case. After about a week of questioning, the justices came to a unanimous decision. They ruled a Negro conceitedly qualified to receive professional legal education offered by a state cannot be denied such education because of her color. The state must provide such education for her in conformity with the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment and provide it as soon as it does for applicants of any other group. This meant either let Ada into OU or make a new law school, but either way, make it equal, and do it fast. This particular ruling, to do it fast as it would be done for white students, crossed a frontier that had not been crossed before and was a big advancement for the NAACP. In a telegram, the NAACP said it was the furthest advancement yet reached toward the principle that there can be no equality in a segregated system. The state met and in 6 days came up with Langston Law School, a school they made with small funds. Langston Law was very unequal to OU law. The history was not the same. It was housed in the Capitol building and was very small. 2 out of the 3 teachers had no law school teaching experience, the curriculum was not up to date, and there was no student body. That was just the start of how unequal it was. Ada refused to apply to Langston, and the NAACP challenged the school's equity in court. The state thought it was equal and argued that the teachers, although having no law school teaching experience, were very good lawyers and were willing to take time away from their firms to teach at Langston. He said that Langston law students would have access to the Capitol Library, which was better than the OU library. He also argued that OU was overcrowded, so having the school all to herself would be good for Ada. Their arguments were so good, in fact, that when the NAACP brought the state to Cleveland County Court, the judge ruled in favor of the state. But when the state realized they couldn't pay for Langston Law, they were forced to close it and had no choice but to break the state segregation law and let Ada into OU. Segregationists were really against this, and Ada was still required to sit in the very back of the class with a sign that said color. Although nobody directly confronted her with slurs or harassment, behind her back when she walked past racists in the hall, they would say nasty things and call out racial slurs. However, most of the students at OU were okay with Ada joining and even went as far as to protest for her acceptance during the trial. Within days, the colored sign was ripped down and thrown out a window, and white students began to sit next to Ada. In 1951, Ada graduated with a Bachelor of Law and in 1952 passed the bar exam and started practicing law in Chickasaw, her hometown. She fought for civil rights and believed everyone should be treated equally. In 1992, 3 years before she passed away, the governor made her part of the OU Board of Regents, the very people who denied her admission so many years ago. The Supreme Court's ruling in Ada's favor that the state had to give her equal protection as fast as they did for white students was the first case to do this and proved it was possible to integrate fast. This gave the NAACP the backing they needed to move forward full throttle with their desegregation plans. Because of Ada, many students at the graduate level could go to school. Many African Americans wanting to have successful jobs, they couldn't do that before Ada's case. Not many people knew about the NAACP's cause at the time, and the effort had somewhat stalled. When Ada won her case, it brought an international attention to the NAACP. For movement to happen, people have to take action and change their mind. At the time, this was not the case. Then Ada became the face of the movement and provided a new rallying cry. People became aware of the horrors of segregation because of Ada. When it came to school desegregation, Ada unlocked the door and led the way while Brown threw the door off its hinges and let the rest of desegregation through. However, going through didn't necessarily equate to running through. The Brown v. Board ruling provided no way to enforce desegregation, and that led to Brown 2 and the all-deliberate speed compromise, referring to how states should proceed. NAACP wanted speed and fought for integration as soon as possible. Southern states focused on being deliberate, slow, and careful, and procrastinated integration. It took years to integrate the majority of schools, and the job still isn't completely done. Although not perfect, the United States of America is substantially more equal than it was before pioneers such as Ruby Bridges, the Little Rock Nine, Thurgood Marshall, and others. Even though Ada Lois Sipuel Fisher is much less known than these figures, her willingness to step forward came when it was needed most, and her courage led the way to overcome the frontier of racism and segregation in America's schools.